Hi guys.
Hi.
Welcome to Fun and Friends. I'm Avalon.
I'm Sabrina.
And welcome to our channel. We are in kind of a different setting today, so we don't have much of a recap or
board or anything like that.
But
a little bit of a recap that we can remember is that Stefan came back and Elena and Stefan were having a good talk, and she started to be more open to Bonnie and Stefan.
She kind of like told him everything,
but left out the part where Damon is using her for blood supply.
Yeah.
And then she ended up allowing Stefan to finally indulge on her blood supply as well. And then she ended up writing her diary about it, how she's, I guess, keeping that secret from him.
And he was like so nervous about like something else being wrong.
Yeah.
That he was like, oh, okay, that's no big deal. Whatever.
No biggie.
And so they were going to try and like steal the diary
from Caroline at the Founders Festival.
Yeah, because she's not allowed to wear it.
Yeah.
Like anything except for the dress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's like the rules. No cell phones, no purses. Nothing can be on their body except the actual attire that they're wearing for the parade.
Yep. So easy time to steal stuff.
Snatch it. Also, just happy Memorial Day on this day as well. We want to say thank you to all the vets and the ones who sacrificed their lives for us, and we hope everybody's having a really good day.
Chapter 14. Bonnie shivered as she waited outside the tall Victorian house. The air was frosty this morning, and although it was 8 o'clock, the sun had never really come up. The sky was just one dense, massed bank of gray and white clouds, creating an eerie twilight below. She began to stomp her feet and rub her hands together when the Forbes door opened. Bonnie moved back a little beyond the shrubbery. That's such a weird word to say. Shrubbery. It's weird on the lips.
It is. And the tongue.
That was her hiding place, and watched the family walk to their car. Mr. Forbes was carrying nothing but a camera. Mrs. Forbes had a purse and a folding seat. Daniel Forbes, Caroline's youngest brother, had another seat. And Caroline...
Didn't in the TV show she didn't have a brother?
No.
This is new to me.
New information. Bonnie leaned forward, her breath hissing out of satisfaction. Caroline was dressed in jeans and a heavy sweater. And she was carrying some sort of white drawstring purse. Not big, but big enough to hold a small diary. Warmed by triumph, Bonnie waited until waited behind the bush, the shrubbery, until the car drove away. Then she started for the corner of the Thrush Street and Hawthorne Drive. There she is, Aunt Judith.
There she is. Who just parked in behind Jasmine?
Oh, now it's gonna be hard for her to get out. We'll have to talk about that when we're all done.
Sorry, apologies. Sorry.
There she is, Aunt Judith, on the corner. The car slowed to a halt, and Bonnie slid into the back seat with Elena. She's got a white drawstring purse, she murmured into Elena's ear as Aunt Judith pulled out again. Tingling excitement swept over Elena, and she squeezed Bonnie's hand. Good, she breathed. Now we'll see if she brings it into Mr. Grimsby's. If not, you tell Meredith it's in the car. Bonnie nodded agreement and squeezed Elena's hand back. They arrived at Mrs. Grimsby's just in time to see Caroline going inside with a white bag hanging from her arm. Bonnie and Elena exchanged a look. Now it was up to Elena to see where Caroline left it in the house. I'll get out here too, Miss Gilbert, said Bonnie as Elena jumped out of the car. She would wait outside with Meredith until Bonnie could tell them where the bag was. The important thing was not to let Caroline suspect anything unusual. Mrs. Grimsby, who answered Elena's knock, was the Fells Church librarian. Her house looked almost like a library itself. There were bookcases everywhere and books stacked on the floor. She was also the keeper of Fells Church historical artifacts, including clothing that had been preserved from the town's earliest days. Just now the house was ringing with young voices, and bedrooms were full of students in various stages of undress. Mrs. Grimsby always supervised the costumes for the pageant. Elena was ready to ask to be put in the same room as Caroline, but it wasn't necessary. Mrs. Grimsby was already ushering her in. Caroline stripped down to her fashionable underwear, gave Elena what was undoubtedly meant to be a nonchalant look, but Elena detected the vicious gloating beneath. She kept her own eyes on the bundle of clothing Mrs. Grimsby was picking up off the bed. Here you are, Elena. One of the most nicely preserved pieces, and all authentic too, even the ribbons. We believe this dress belonged to Honoria Fell. It's beautiful, said Elena, as Mrs. Grimsby shook out the folds of thin white material. What's it made of? Moravian muslin and silk gauze. Since it's quite cold today, you can wear the velvet jacket over it. The librarian indicated to a dusty rose garment lying over the chair back. Elena cast a surreptitious glance at Caroline as she began to change. Yes, there was a bag at Caroline's feet. She debated making a grab for it, but Mrs. Grimsby was still in the room. The muslin dress was very simple, its flowing material belted high under the bosom with a pale rose ribbon. The slightly puffed elbow-length sleeves were tied with ribbon of the same color. Fashions had been loose enough in the 19th century to fit 20th century girl, at least if she were slender. Elena smiled as Mrs. Grimsby led her to a mirror. Did it really belong to Honoria Fell? She asked, making the marble image of the lady lying on her tomb in the ruined church. That's the story anyway, said Mrs. Grimsby. She mentions the dress like it in her journal, so we're pretty sure. She kept a journal? Elena was startled. Oh, yes. I have it in a case in the living room. I'll show it to you on the way out. Now for the jacket. Oh, what's that? Something velvet fluttered to the ground as Elena picked the jacket up. She could feel the expression freeze. She caught up the note before Mrs. Grimsby could hand it over and glanced at it. One line. She remembered writing it in her diary on September 4th on the first day of school, except that after she had written it, she had crossed it out. The words were not crossed out. They were bold and clear. Something awful is going to happen today. Elena could barely restrain herself from rounding on Caroline and shaking the note in her face, but that would ruin everything. She forced herself to stay calm as she crumpled up the little slip of paper and threw it into the wastebasket. It's just a piece of trash, she said, and turned back to Mrs. Grimsby, whose shoulders were stiff. Caroline said nothing, but Elena felt the triumphant green eyes on her. Just you wait, she thought. Wait until I get that diary back. I'm going to burn it, and when I do, you and I are going to have a talk. To Mrs. Grimsby, she said, I'm ready. So am I, said Caroline in a demure voice. Elena put on that cool indifference as she eyed the other girl. Caroline's pale green gown and long green and white sashes were not nearly as pretty as hers. Wonderful. You girls can go ahead and wait for your rides. Oh, and Caroline, don't forget your reticule. I won't, Caroline said. Smiling, she reached the drawstring bag at her feet.
And push up again, and push.
It was fortunate that from the position she couldn't see Elena's face, for in that instant the cool indifference shattered completely. Elena stared dumbfounded as Caroline began to tie the bag at her waist. Thank you. Her astonishment didn't escape Mrs. Grimsby. That's a reticule, the ancestor of a modern bag, the old woman explained kindly. Ladies used to keep their gloves and fans in them. Caroline came by it and got it earlier this week so she could repair some of the loose beadwork. Very thoughtful of her. I'm sure it was, Elena managed in a strangled voice. She had to get out of here or something awful was going to happen right now. She was going to start screaming or knock Caroline down or explode. I need some fresh air, she said. She bolted from the room and from the house, bustling outside. Bonnie and Meredith were waiting in Meredith's car. Elena's heart thumped strangely as she walked to it and leaned out in the window. She outsmarted us, she said quietly. The bag is part of her costume, and she's going to wear it all day. Bonnie and Meredith stared first at her and then at each other. But then what are we going to do? Bonnie asked. I don't know. With sick dismay, this realization finally came home to Elena. I don't know. We can still watch her. Maybe she'll take the bag off at lunch or something. But Meredith's voice rang hollow. I knew the truth, Elena thought, and the truth was it was hopeless. They'd lost.
Sorry for the interruption. Like I said, it's Memorial Day, so all the families here, and they're showing off new stuff that they bought, like a motorcycle and
they're all hanging out in the back in the hot tub.
Yeah,
they're like, we got so many bloopers for you guys.
So we apologize for the loud noises. We just can't control it, but hope you guys enjoyed something different. Maybe wakes you up a little bit.
Maybe. I gotta figure out where we are. Hold on. She bolted from the room. I need some fresh air, she said. She bolted from the room and from the house, bursting outside. Bonnie and Meredith were waiting in Meredith's car. Elena's heart thumped strangely as she walked to it and leaned in the window. She outsmarted us, she said quietly. The bag is part of her costume, and she's going to wear it all day. Bonnie and Meredith stared first at her and then at each other. But then what are we going to do? Bonnie asked. I don't know. With thick dismay, this realization finally came home to Elena. I don't know. We can still watch her. Maybe she'll take her bag off at lunch or something. But Meredith's voice rang hollow. They all knew the truth, Elena thought. And the truth was it was hopeless. They'd lost. Bonnie glanced in the rearview mirror and twisted in her seat. It's your ride. Elena looked. 2 white horses were drawing a smartly renovated buggy down the street. Crepe paper was threaded through the buggy's wheels, ferns decorated its seats, and a large banner on the side proclaimed, "The Spirit of Fells Church." Elena had time for only one desperate message. Watch her, she said, and if there's ever a moment where she's alone, then she had to go. But all through the long, terrible morning, there was never a moment when Caroline was alone. She was surrounded by a crowd of spectators. For Elena, the parade was pure torture. She sat in the buggy beside the mayor and his wife, trying to smile, trying to look normal, but the sick dread was like a crushing weight on her chest. Somewhere in front of her, among the marching bands, the drill teams, the open convertibles, was Caroline. Elena had forgotten to find out which float she was on. The first schoolhouse float, perhaps. A lot of the younger children in costume would be on that. It didn't matter. Wherever Caroline was, she was in full view of half the town. The luncheon that followed the parade was held in the high school cafeteria. Elena was trapped at the table with Mayor Dowdley and his wife. Caroline was at the nearby table. Elena could see the shining back of her auburn head, and sitting beside her, often leaning possessively around her, was Tyler Smallwood. Elena was in the perfect view to view the little drama that occurred through the halfway through lunch. Her heart leapt into her throat when she saw Stefan looking casual stroll by Caroline's table. He spoke to Caroline. Elena watched, forgetting even to play with the untouched food on her plate, but what she saw next made her heart plummet. Caroline tossed her head and replied to him briefly, and then turned back to her meal, and Tyler lumbered to his feet, his face reddening as he made an angry gesture. He didn't sit down again until Stefan turned away. Stefan looked towards Elena as he left, and for a moment their eyes met in a wordless communication. There was nothing he could do then. Even if his powers had returned, Tyler was going to keep him away from Caroline. The crushing weight squeezed Elena's lungs as she could scarcely breathe. After, she simply sat in the daze of misery and despair until someone nudged her and told her it was time to go backstage. She listened most indefinitely to Mayor Dowdley's speech of welcome. He spoke about the trying time Fells Church had faced recently, and about the community spirit that had sustained them through these past months. The awards were given out for scholarships, for athletics, for community service. Matt came up to receive Outstanding Male Athlete of the Year, and Elena saw him look at her curiously. Then came the pageant. The elementary school children giggled and tripped and forgot their lines as they portrayed scenes from the founding of Fells Church through the Civil War. Elena watched them without taking any of it in. Ever since last night, she'd been slightly dizzy and shaky, and now she felt as if she were coming down with the flu. Her brain, usually full of schemes and calculations, was empty. She couldn't think anymore, and she almost didn't care. The pageant ended with a popping flashbulbs and tremendous applause. Tremendous. When the last little Confederate soldier was off the stage, Mayor Dowdley called for silence. "And now," he said, "for the students who will perform the closing ceremonies, please show your appreciation for the spirit of independence, the spirit of fidelity, and the spirit of Fells Church." Woo, 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 woo. Woo! Go, guys! The applause was even more thunderous. Elena stood beside John Clifford, the brainy senior who had been chosen to represent the spirit of independence. On the other side of John was Caroline. Fidelity. Wow.
Yeah. I'm surprised you didn't catch it earlier.
Wow. In detached, nearly apathetic way, Elena knows that Caroline looked magnificent, her head tilted back, her eyes blazing, her cheeks flushed with color. John went first, adjusting his glasses and the microphone before he read the heavy brown book on the lectern. Officially, the seniors were free to choose their own selections. In practice, they had always read from the works of M.C. Marsh, the only poet Fells Church had ever produced. All during John's reading, Caroline was upstaging him. She smiled at the audience. She shook out her hair. She waved the reticulaire wing from her wrist. Her fingers stroked the drawstring bag lovingly, and Elena found herself staring at it, hypnotized, memorized every bead. John took a bow and resumed his place by Elena. Caroline threw her shoulders back and did a model's walk to the lectern. This time the applause was mixed with whistles, but Caroline didn't smile. She had amused the era of tragic responsibility with exquisite timing. She waited until the cafeterium was perfectly quiet to speak. I was planning to read a poem by M.C. Marsh today, she said, then into the attentive stillness, but I'm not going to. Why read from this? She held up a 19th century volume of poetry, when there is something much more relevant in a book I happened to find. Happened to steal, you mean, thought Elena. Her eyes sought among the faces in the crowd, and she located Stefan, standing towards the back, but Bonnie and Meredith stationed on either side as if protecting him. Then Elena knows something else. Tyler with Dick and several boys were standing just a few yards behind. The guys were older than high school age, and they looked tough. There were 5 of them. Go, thought Elena, finding Stefan's eyes again. She willed him to understand what she was saying. Go, Stefan. Please leave before this happens. Go now. Very slightly, almost imperceptibly, Stefan shook his head. Caroline's fingers were dipping into the bag as if she couldn't wait. What I'm about to read about Fells Church today, not 102 or 200 years ago, she was saying, working herself into a sort of exultant fever. Exultant. There we go. Fever. It's important now because it's about someone who's living in town with us. In fact, he's right in this room. Tyler must have written the speech for her, Elena. Oh, thank you. Decided. Last month in June, he'd shown her quite a gift for that kind of thing. Oh, Stefan, I'm scared. Her thoughts jumbled in incoherence as Caroline plunged her hand into the bag. I think you'll understand what I mean when you hear it, Caroline said, and with a quick motion, she pulled a velvet-covered book from the reticule and held it up dramatically. I think it will explain a lot of what's been going on in Fells Church recently. Breathing quickly and lightly, she looked from the spellbound audience to the book in her hand. Elena had almost lost consciousness when Elena jerked the diary out. Bright sparkles ran along the edges of her vision. The dizziness roared up, ready to overwhelm Elena, and then she noticed something. It must be her eyes. The stage lights, the flash bulbs must have dazed them. She certainly felt ready to faint any minute. It was hardly surprising she couldn't see properly. The book in Caroline's hand looked green, not blue. I must be going crazy, or this is a dream, or maybe it's a trick of the lighting, but look at Caroline's face. Caroline's mouth working was staring at the velvet book. She seemed to have forgotten the audience altogether. She turned the diary over and over in her hands, looking at all the sides of it. Her movements became more frantic. She thrust a hand into the reticule as if somehow hoped to find something else in it, then cast a wild glance around the stage as if she were looking for might have fallen to the ground. The audience was murmuring, getting impatient. Mayor Dodley and the high school principal were exchanging tight-lipped frowns. Having found nothing on the floor, Caroline was staring at the small book again. But now she was gazing at it as if it were a scorpion. With a sudden gesture, she wrenched it open and looked inside as if her last hope was that only under the cover, which exchanged the words inside, might be Elena's. Then she slowly looked up from the book at the packed cafeteria. Silence had descended again, and the moment drew out, when every eye remained fixed on the girl in the pale green gown. Then, with an inarticulate sound, Caroline whirled and clattered off the stage. She struck at Elena as she went by, her face a mask of rage and hatred. Gently, a feeling of floating, Elena stooped to pick up what Caroline had tried to hit her with, Caroline's diary. There was activity behind Elena as people ran after Caroline and in front of her as the audience exploded into argument, and discussion. Elena found Stefan as he looked as if jubilation was sneaking up on him, but he also looked as bewildered as Elena felt. Bonnie and Meredith were the same. As Stefan's gaze crossed hers, Elena felt a rush of gratitude and joy, but her predominant emotion was awe. It was a miracle beyond all hope. They had been rescued. They had been saved. Who do you think did it?
I think Damon did it.
I think so too.
I think Damon did this.
And then her eyes picked out a dark head among the crowd.
Damon.
Damon was lounging against the north wall. His lips were curved into a half smile, and his eyes met Elena's boldly. Mayor Dowley was beside her, urging her forward, quieting the crowd, trying to restore order. But it was no use. Elena read her section with a dreamy voice to a babbling group of people who weren't paying attention in the slightest. She wasn't paying attention either. She had no idea what words she was saying. Every so often, she looked at Damon. There was applause, scattered and distracted when she finished, and the mayor announced the rest of the events for the afternoon. And then it was all over, and Elena was free to go. She flitted off stage without any conscious idea of where she was going, but her legs carried her to the north wall. Damon's dark head moved out the side door, and she followed. The air in the courtyard seemed deliciously cool after the crowded room, and the clouds above were silvery and swirling. Damon was waiting for her. Her steps slowed, but did not stop. She moved until she was only a foot away from him, her eyes searching his face. There was a long moment of silence, and then she spoke. Why? I thought you'd be more interested in how. He patted his jacket insignificantly. I got invited for coffee this morning after scraping up an acquaintance last week. But why? He shrugged, and for an instant something like consternation flicked across his fine drawn features. It seemed to Elena that he himself didn't know why, or didn't want to admit it. For my own purposes, he said. I don't think so. Something was building between them, something that frightened Elena with its power. I don't think that was the reason at all. There was a dangerous glimmer in those dark eyes. Don't push me, Elena. She moved closer so that she was almost touching him and looked at him. I think, she said, that maybe you don't need to be pushed. His face was only inches from hers, and Elena knew that what might have happened if at the moment a voice hadn't broken in on them. You did manage to make it after all. I'm so glad. It was Aunt Judith. Elena felt as if she were being whisked from one world to another. I bet she was about to kiss him.
I think so too.
Oh, girlfriend.
She felt something between them.
Uh-oh. She blinked dizzily, stepping back, letting out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. And so you got to hear Elena read, Aunt Judith continued happily. You did a beautiful job, Elena, but I don't know what's going on with Caroline. That girl in this town are acting bewitched lately. Nerves, suggested Damon, his voice carefully solemn. Elena felt the urge to giggle and then a wave of irritation. It was all very well to be grateful to Damon for saving them, but not for Damon. There wouldn't have been a problem in the first place. Damon had committed the crimes Caroline wanted to pin on Stefan. And where is Stefan? She said, voicing her next thought aloud. She could see Bonnie and Meredith in the courtyard alone. Aunt Judith's face showed disapproval. I haven't seen him, she said briefly. Then she smiled fondly. But I have this idea. Why don't you come to dinner with us, Damon? Then afterwards, perhaps you and Elena could... Stop it, said Elena to Damon. He looked politely inquiring. What? Said Aunt Judith. Stop it, Elena said to Damon again. You know what. Just stop it right now. That was it. Boom. So she's starting to feel a little something
towards Damon.
Ooh.
I feel like she's going to be in a place of hard tug-of-war, and she's not going to be able to keep her story straight anymore between Stefan and Damon. So
I think that we're going to see a lot more of a struggle with that. And her coming to terms with her feelings for him.
Because she's been denying them for so long, and I think you can only deny your feelings about someone for so long until it actually boils over.
Yeah.
Especially when they keep coming back in your life like this, and they don't leave you alone, then the feelings don't go away.
Yeah.
So she has a big uphill battle for between these two boys. And like we said in the last one, it's like history repeating itself.
Yeah.
There's like a cycle happening.
There is a cycle.
So we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see.
What do you guys think? Put your comments and questions and opinions down below. We would love to hear them. Also, we're also hoping to have a Q&A soon, so if you have questions for us personally, go ahead and put them down below or on our Instagram page about the post for Q&As.
Yep.
But yeah.
Bye.
Bye, guys.